Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. The meeting is being webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. All today's decisions will be reached through a vote, and I will call for the vote at the appropriate time, although mostly they are just to be noted. I will begin by reading the names of members on the committee so they can confirm their attendance for the public record. So members, please unmute your microphones and confirm your attendance when your name is called so we can ensure that you can be heard. So I'm Councillor Alexis McAvoy. I'm acting chairman of the committee today. Councillor Celia Brooks attending as a Conservative deputy today.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Dominic Hiscott.
I'm present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Keith House.
Yes, I'm here too. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Kemp G.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Derek Mellor.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Floss Mitchell.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Rob McCatter.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tom Thacker.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. First item is apologies for absence. I actually haven't received any apologies unless there have been any others that have been received. No? Okay, so we'll pass on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Just to remind members, if you have any declaration in any item to be discussed today, declare it at the time that item is discussed. Okay, no declarations at the moment. So item 3 is minutes. That's on pages 5 to 10 of your papers. Minutes of the meeting. Are you all agreed that they are a correct record? And does any member want to speak up if there are any concerns?
Agreed.
Carolyn, please.
Chairman, if I could just give an update under item 195 on the minutes, just to confirm, following the COVID-related delay, members will be pleased to note that by the end of January, as expected, the 2019-20 annual accounts were signed off by our external auditors. The final formal audit included an unqualified opinion on the accounts, an unqualified conclusion for value of money, and no adverse comment related to our going concern status until March 2022. And whilst this was the expected outcome, as previously verbally reported to the committee, it remains excellent news, particularly during these exceptionally challenging times, albeit significant financial challenges remain ahead for all local authorities. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. I mean, we need to congratulate you and your team because it's been a dreadful year and hugely difficult circumstances, and to be able to say that we're a going concern in spite of adverse publicity, earlier last year, this is an excellent conclusion. So well done to you and your team.
Thank you, Chairman. I will pass that on to colleagues across the team. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to comment at all on the minutes? Okay, so item 4, deputations. We have no deputations today. I'll just move my screen up a little bit. It keeps moving. Oops, there we go. Item 5 is Chairman's announcements. There are a couple of things I would actually like to say. I know that Councillor Evans was remembered at the full council meeting, but I thought it would be good to acknowledge the contribution that Keith made to this committee. I understand that Keith was chairman from the committee's inception in June 2009 until his sad death in December. I found him to be a very kind and gentle colleague and a chairman who was able to use those skills to gently probe and call to account the work that this committee does. I'm sure that we will all miss him. Thank you. One other thing I'd like to say, as this is our last meeting before the election, I would like to thank Carolyn Rosa and her team for all the support that she has given me. It's been quite invaluable. I'd like to thank the officers for all their excellent work, and I'd like to thank the members for your contributions, and I wish you all well. That's the end of my announcement. So the next item is item 6 on the agenda, which is the use of regulatory investigatory powers, pages 11 to 16. And if I could ask Peter Andrews if he'd like to speak to this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This report outlines the activity that the County Council has undertaken in the use of its surveillance powers under REPA. The table of use is on page 15 of your pack, and the recommendation is that the committee notes the report. Committee members will note that the powers have been used twice. There have been 2 applications in the first 3 quarters of 2020 to 2021, and these relate to 28 specific notices for access to communications data, and by that we mean the ownership of IP addresses, not the contents of any private correspondence. I'm happy to take any questions on this there.
Thank you very much, Peter. Does anybody want to make any comments, please? Everybody's silent. Oh, you're not using your Councillor House, getting used to technology, I see.
I was trying to get my mouse in the right place. It'll wander across the table because I haven't got a kitty to check to get it in the right, get it back in the right place.
Okay.
So these reports are always very interesting, but they almost always, because we don't use the powers a great deal, tend to say more or less the same thing. I just wonder, in grounds of efficiency, whether we could take an annual report on the REPA powers rather than each audit committee, because it takes up a lot of Peter's time for quite marginal benefit, really. In the wider scheme of things, I'm not saying it's not important, but just in terms of efficiency, given that we almost always hear the same thing, I just wonder whether we could take an annual report.
Well, thank you for that. Would you like to say something, Peter?
Yes, if only we could. Unfortunately, we're bound by the Home Office regulations in terms of the use of surveillance powers, and according to those regulations, we are required to report to the Audit Committee on a quarterly basis. We try to keep this report as succinct as we possibly can.
Okay, well, I think that's your answer, Councillor House.
Don't say I was trying for efficiency, though.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that one? No, so the recommendation is on page 11, and the recommendation is that the Audit Committee receives and notes the data regarding the County Council's use of surveillance powers as were attached. Okay, so we're all comfortable with that. Thank you very much. So if we now move on to item 7, I think Sarah Croft and Kevin Souter will help us with this. It's the annual audit letter on pages 17 to 46.
Thank you,
Councillor House, you've got your hand up again. Is that a legacy?
Just to declare an interest, as I always do at this point, because I'm a member of the board of PSAA, which is the appointing body for the appointing person
Okay,
for our external auditor.
So that's noted, Caroline, is it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good afternoon, members. So the item we have in front of you today is our annual audit letter. The purpose of the annual audit letter is to summarise the audit findings for the members of the council and particularly the members of the public. It's very much a shorter document than previous reports we bring to you during the year. It is aimed to be a summary and accessible to particularly the members of the public should they choose to be interested in what we've been up to and what we've reported during the year. It doesn't contain new information on our audit findings. We have discussed the findings with you at previous meetings, so particularly at the committee meeting in September, and then we updated you at the committee meeting in December as we progressed through on those last remaining aspects of the audit. Carolyn did steal a little bit of my thunder in terms of the headline messages when she gave an update on the progress of the audit. But I would like to confirm that yes, we did indeed, as set out on page 25 of the agenda pack of our report, we did indeed give an unqualified opinion on the accounts of the County Council and the pension fund. And for the County Council, we also gave an unqualified value for money conclusion on your arrangements to give value for money in the use of your resources for the public taxpayer. As it was a delaying issue for the accounts this year, as has been pointed out, I will also confirm that we did work through the going concern issues in the form of the evidence that was presented to us around Christmas time and through January. We didn't have any adverse comments to make. Again, as you've been notified, that was generally expected, and no impact upon our audit report. So it very much was, from our perspective, getting the right information in the right process to enable us to undertake our responsibilities in accordance with our auditing standards. Not that we had any fundamental issues or concerns with the information or what it might be telling us. But we do have to make sure that we undertake those processes and undertake them properly so that everybody using the annual accounts in our audit opinion can have confidence we have done the job in the right way. So we're not going to highlight any of the particular findings within the report. I will leave that to members after my overview to ask any questions they may have, and Sarah and I will be happy to attempt to answer them. But I am going to pull out one section of the report. I think it's appropriate to bring that out and not to duck the issue, which is regarding our position on audit fees. So on section 7, which starts on page 42 of your agenda pack, particularly moving over to page 43 and 44, we set out the fee position for both the County Council and the pension fund. And you'll see what we're asking for is a number of adjustments to be made to the scale fee, which the public sector audit appointments set at the beginning of the audit. There are two aspects really here. We have what I would call the sort of normal adjustments. So things that come up in the course of any audit mean we have to do some additional work, new risks arising, for example, and particularly for this year, it was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the additional work we had to undertake to respond to the potential areas of risk that caused in the financial statements. We also have a second element, which we are referring to as a request to rebase the scale fee for changes in work to address professional regulatory requirements. We've tried to explain that on page 45 of your agenda pack. It does relate to a long-standing conversation we've been having over time, since probably about this time last year. What we're trying to do here is address an issue that various sources have raised, including PSA itself and Sir Tony Redmond in his subsequent reviews, that audit fees have now really got divorced from the level of risk that we are looking at in terms of local authority accounts. Reducing payments over time to auditors is getting divorced from the amount of work we are having to do to respond to that level of risk and respond to the level of information and input we are having to make as a result of the regulatory requirements from our regulators, such as the Financial Reporting Council. So we've been trying to have conversations throughout with PSAA and with all our clients on that basis. The conversations have been, I think, from my perspective, useful. We may not have reached agreement, which we have said in our report, but we've certainly been able to constructively air the viewpoints from both sides, and we haven't had a deterioration in any relationship as a result. So I do thank the officers from the council for their willingness to engage in that conversation. Where we are now essentially is that we've got to the point where we need to bring this information into the public domain and submit that to the PSAA. So we would always prefer to try and have a final fee that's fully agreed by everybody, but it's not been possible in terms of the timescales at this point. So the fees do remain subject to the PSAA's final decision. And that they are the ones who ultimately have to make that decision as the appointers of the auditors. So I think I'll leave my presentation there, and I will take any questions the members may have.
Okay, I'm sure somebody would like to ask Kevin a question. Councillor House.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Two questions to Kevin. Firstly, I wonder if you could just expand the point about going concern and why it wasn't possible to sign off the accounts on time. And I'll come back with a question on the audit fees after that.
So on time is a difficult expression. Auditors will sign off the accounts when they are ready to do so and not before. We need to make sure we've gone through the proper process, as I've said, and undertaking the proper procedures. Now, we do try and aim to work to the council's deadline of the 30th of November, as it was last year, to publish a set of accounts with an opinion if that's provided. But if we're not in the position where we are unable to do so, it generally is better to pause and delay giving that opinion rather than. Ultimately, the nuclear option would be, if we had to be forced to give one at that point in time, it would have to be a qualified opinion. And that just isn't an appropriate response in many situations, including what we had with the county council. So the delay was about the ability for the county council to give us the information in the form that it was necessary for us to understand the future cash flows of the organisation. It's not something that the county council has had to do before and arose due to the coronavirus pandemic. And the way in which the county council works is not something that they easily had to hand. So we worked with the officers to try and undertake our procedures on what the officers could provide. We did go through a number of processes and consultations, but unfortunately that just really wasn't supporting what we needed. So we had to pause, start again, reset the expectations in terms of a cash flow forecast in the way we needed it. And that just took the time through to roughly before Christmas to provide. We did have to pause then for a Christmas break, and we picked it up immediately afterwards and completed our procedures. So it was a case of, once we had the information in the form that we really needed, we had the discussions how that was put together. It was resolved relatively quickly afterwards. I think we've taken a lot of learning through the process that we can put into next year's audit, and it very much was a new requirement, a new consideration that was requested, and it just took a little bit more time than we'd all anticipated to get there.
So I'm interested, through you, Chairman, that this is described as the county's deadline. I always thought it was the government's deadline rather than the county council's deadline.
Okay. So the accounts and audit regulations set out, and yes, they are of the MHCLG, that the accounts should be published with an audit opinion if it is available by the 30th of November. And in this circumstance, the audit opinion wasn't available. The county council correctly published its accounts, making very clear that the audit opinion was not available at that point in time, and then has republished its accounts as soon as the audit opinion was available.
Right, thank you for that. That's much clearer, Chairman. And so the summary basically is that the county council couldn't provide information in time for our auditors to do that.
I think, can I just clarify that? In time, in the format that was required?
Well, that's the same thing effectively, isn't it, Chairman?
Depends how you interpret it.
Because not every council couldn't get their accounts sorted out on time with their auditor. Can I just turn to the audit fee page, because the fee page could be read in different ways depending on how you want to read it. And I just want to make sure I've got clear that I'm reading it the correct way, because I might not be. We've got it as page 23 out of 26 in our files, Kevin, I'm afraid, rather than the number page you've got. But it's the page headed audit fees - Hampshire County Councils. I'm looking at that page, not the pension fees page. Can you confirm what I think is right, that the total fee we paid for 1920 is roughly £200,000, which is the £89,000 plus £65,000 plus the £56,000, not a different combination of those numbers?
Yes, that would be correct, subject to PSAA's final determination. I think it is also important to highlight here that the £56,000, the final aspect, is a non-audit fee, so it's not related to the statutory audit of the council's accounts. That is the separate work we do on the controls report for the integrated business centre. So we do, under audit regulations and ethical standards, have to make the distinction between that and report that separately. But yes, in total, fees to EY, if agreed by PSAA, would come back to that total.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So I'm almost there, Chairman. Just one more, if I can. It's what we all understand.
2, we're up to 4.
Well, these are subsets of the 2. Chairman, because it
Well,
all
you
depends
might be stealing somebody else's thunder.
It all depends on the answer, doesn't it, Chairman, as we know. So I take the point about the 56,000, Kevin, and I appreciate that. So the figure that's being bid for to PSAA, just for the benefit of other members who may not be familiar with the process, is roughly in the order for the audit-related work of 156,000. £65,000 extra on an £89,000 audit seems to be quite a lot, particularly given this was a figure that Ernst & Young actually bid for to do this work. I wondered if we could have a comment on that, and then I'll happily be quiet at that point, Chairman.
So I think, members, that illustrates the fact that £89,000 in our view, and I will emphasise that it is our view, is far too low for an organisation of the size of the Hampshire County Council. We do believe that it should be the 89,000 plus the additional roughly 40,000 to come to a sustainable audit fee that matches the inputs required for us underneath the various regulatory changes and inputs we're required to have. Now, the scale fee was set on the basis of taking fees roughly about 4 years ago and chopping them by a percentage. When we undertook our contract, an invitation to tender to the PSAA, we did not have or did not submit an audit fee based upon every individual organisation. And that was not the way the contract worked. We submitted against an overall tender. We did not know what audits we may have been bidding for at the time. So there was, again, this come back to the point that the whole process overall is missing its link between the individual organisation and the amount of work we have to do, again, in our viewpoint. So to Councillor House's question, the first aspect, yes, it's a sizable increase. I agree. I don't expect people to just nod at that and say, okay, thanks very much. Of course, we'll pay it, because you have your responsibilities to the taxpayer to be appropriately challenging us and making sure it's right. But we do believe that is a reflection of how the base scale fee does need to move to be sustainable. And then the second aspect, of course, is for the additional elements that we were required to undertake last year due to the impact of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to respond to that, Carolyn, or do you want to go on to do you want to sum it up at the end?
Chairman, yes, please. It was just to add a comment in response to Councillor House's question. Just to confirm, as it states within the report, there has been ongoing discussions about these additional fee matters, and just to reassure the Audit Committee that my firm opinion is that we should not be subject to these additional fees, and therefore I will be submitting a case to PSAA explaining the rationale for that. Councillor House is correct. One of the aspects that I would focus upon is when you let a contract and you bid against a contract, I would imagine our external auditors would have quite a lot to say if thereafter we were then to post-negotiate on contracts without just cause. So our view very strongly is that as far as we are concerned, the audit remains as the audit was, unless PSAA can be convinced that there are additional regulation requirements that require additional work. Of course, we all have to meet new and different requirements and regulations. We do all the time within local authority. We don't receive additional funding to do so. We have to then recalibrate the work that we do to fit within the resources required. The aspect about COVID, of course, as we all know, is that COVID has required us all to do things differently and to perform new and different tasks. And therefore, again, if PSAA view that that should be picked up by the local authority, then I'm sure that will be communicated. The aspect I was disappointed in is that there's no recognition at all of the savings that EY and indeed all audit firms will have made through a year of working at home in not having to pay travel fees, overnight accommodation, and indeed maximising the time that was available for the audit without having travel time, etc., to take account of. So I would have perhaps been a little more understanding if I'd seen that contra entry of reduction being brought to the table. Colleagues, I just thought it was helpful if I could maybe explain my rationale for not agreeing the increased fees. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Very good. Councillor Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I just come back, hopefully briefly, to the going concern point? Am I right thinking that any large organisation or charity or regulated organisation was subject to additional checks and questions at audit this year, and perhaps the additional checks and questions are going to be more complicated depending on the complexity of the organisation? I'm just trying to get a scale. I mean, I know that Hampshire wasn't the only place to have its going concern status take longer to confirm this year. So I just wanted to have a little bit of a sense of the scale of that, please.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be exactly the case. We needed to ask the questions on all of our audits, be they private sector, public sector, charities, any mix where we have to opine upon the going concern status within our audit report. COVID-19 made things very complicated, and so further work was required.
Okay, is that okay, Floss? Carolyn, did you want to respond to that?
Chair, but it was just a point for information. As I understand it, a notification was put out by PSAA post the end of November, indicating that some circa 60% of local authorities at that point in time were still outstanding their accounts being signed off. So it did have clearly a significant impact on local authorities completing their accounts. Now, we did complete the accounts within the end of May timeline, but it affected circa 60% having their accounts signed off. Mainly, I understand it because of going concern additional work. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell, is that a legacy hand or did you want to come back?
Sorry, no, I didn't want to come back, but I would just comment that I work for an organisation in my day job which has got a pretty much guaranteed income, and we still had going concern delays to our audit.
Okay, and Councillor Thacker, you did have your hand up. Have you changed your mind? Changed your mind? Okay, would anybody else like to comment at all? Right, well, the recommendation, if nobody else wants to say anything else, is on page 17, and the recommendation is that the Audit Committee receives and notes the annual audit letter for the year ending the 31st of March. Do any members have any other comments or questions? Otherwise, are you content to note this report?
Noted.
Content.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next item then, thank you for that, Mr. Souter. The next item is now number 8. This is the Treasury Management Statement for 21-22 to 23-24 on pages 47 to 72. Just find 47, there it is. And I would like to ask Rob Sarfas if you'd like to talk to this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm here to present the Treasury Management Strategy Statement today. So this helps to support the capital programme and other financing decisions over the coming 3 years. It's about the management of Treasury investments and borrowing and mitigating any associated risks. This is a strategy that's updated on an annual basis, so it will be familiar to members of the committee. So I'll focus on highlighting the key changes since last year in talking to this report today. So in terms of economic context, the economic environment is continuing to be challenging. That's low interest rates, which our advisors Arlene Close expect to continue, which has an impact on our investment returns. But it doesn't significantly change the actual strategy for Treasury management. The current environment also means that Arlene Close recommend a more cautious approach to who we lend money to and for how long. So table 1 shows that the council continues to expect to hold significant investment balances. So therefore, in terms of a borrowing strategy, there's no new external borrowing anticipated. And we intend to continue to follow Arlene Close's advice that it's better at this time to internally borrow to meet any capital programme needs that aren't met in other ways. Paragraph 31 notes the recent rule change around PWLB lending requirements. So this is restricting access to the PWLB for authorities buying investment assets primarily for yield. But the council doesn't intend to borrow, and even if it did, it wouldn't be affected as there are no plans to make any investments of that type. So moving on to the investment strategy, so paragraph 40 onwards, it's a continuation of the strategy from previous years, continuing to hold a diversified portfolio to mitigate risks, also using stable core balances to make those longer term investments where we're targeting higher yields to support the revenue budget. And the County Council's agreed to increase the limit on these investments to £250 million as part of the capital and investment strategy. So you can see on table 2 that 194.5 million of that allocation had been invested to the end of December, with a further £6 million invested for the Thames Basin Heaths Group, which is the group of local authorities where the County Council is the administrative body. Moving on to the investment limits, so this is table 4, paragraph 65. There's a limit on investments with any single organisation of £70 million. To note, this is higher than last year because investment balances are expected to be higher. So these balances are expected to be higher because of, you may recall, paying 3 years of employers' pension contributions up front in one go last April. That higher limit filters through to the sector and counterparty limits in table 5. So Ireland Close have recommended removing the limit on investing a maximum of 50% of investment balances in money market funds. So they originally introduced a sector limit on money market funds because they all make very similar underlying investments. But in their current climate, they believe that investing more in money market funds would actually offer a better security position than other options. But given the size of the council's investment balances, the change is unlikely to have any practical impact. Ireland Close also recommended simplifying table 5, so that's to remove the distinction between different credit ratings that you may recall from the previous format of that table. That's because investment decisions are never made solely based on the credit rating, taking into account other factors like reviewing the financial statements, credit default swap prices, things like that, which are summarised in paragraph 80. Finally, Ireland Close also recommend introducing a requirement to hold liquid investments, so that's the overnight money market funds, bank accounts, that kind of thing, across at least 4 counterparties to reduce the risk of not being able to access that cash, which is in paragraph 83. And the only exception would be in times of severe market distress, when it may be that Ireland Close advised that the UK government's the only place to safely invest. Again, that's new to the strategy, but practically won't make a significant difference to the day-to-day operations, as we've always sought to hold investments in a diversified way. That summarises the key changes from last year, so I'll leave it there, but I'm of course very happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Rob. Councillor Thacker. You're mute. Famous words. You're mute, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. The paragraph 80, the final sentence is, no investments will be made with an organisation if there's substantive doubts about its credit quality, even though it may otherwise meet the above criteria. That decision on credit quality, is that a set of rules that are adhered to, or a finger in the air? How is a decision made over an organisation's credit quality if we've removed the credit ratings, Rob?
So we still pay regard to the credit rating. It's just that in terms of the presentation of that table at table 5, it's quite a busy table if you split and you have multiple rows for different credit ratings. But we still would only invest with where an organisation does have a credit rating. We'd only invest with one where it was A- or better. Or where it was an organisation that didn't have that kind of credit rating, where, speaking to Ireland Close, we believed that it had a similar credit quality to that.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to ask Rob a question? Councillor Hiscock.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, I was just curious really to know whether the Council's declaration of a climate emergency has affected any of the areas where the council's been making its investments. I'm thinking about things like the shared equity bonds and this sort of area here. Are we still investing in organisations where perhaps we shouldn't be if we are serious about declaring a climate emergency? And should we be investing in other areas that would help further that cause?
Would you like to answer that, Rob?
Thank you. Yes. So we manage our Treasury management investments in line with the SIPFA code, which sets out that we need to consider the security and the liquidity of investments ahead of seeking any yield from those investments. So they're the broad parameters that we have to work within. When we're making these investments in pooled funds, so property, equity, multi-asset funds, we work with Arlen Close, and Arlen Close carry out due diligence on the pooled funds prior to recommending them for investments. One of the things that Arlen Close do look at as part of that is the ESG, the environmental, social and governance side of things. And although none of the funds that we invest in are specifically ethical funds, they do all have responsible investment or ESG policies, and they are all members of, or all signed up as signatories to the UN's principles for responsible investment. So it's something that's considered in that way. And then when we as officers meet with the representatives from those pooled funds, their approach to ESG is something that we will discuss with them to make sure they are factoring it into those decisions that they're taking. I hope that helps in answering your question.
And did you want to come back, Councillor Hiscock?
It's obviously a very complex issue here, and we have to make sure that the investments are secure. But there are areas where we ought to be investing more, and perhaps areas where we ought to be investing less. And these decisions aren't necessarily shared by all members of the pooled equity bonds, all the people that use these bonds. And I'm wondering, so it doesn't look as if the fact that Hampshire has declared a climate emergency is actually differentiating itself from any of the other organisations that may not have done so. But that's a comment, and I'm not sure whether there's very much at this stage we can do except to ask people to perhaps look more closely at what companies are involved in where we're investing our money and our residents' money.
Does anybody want to come back on that at all? Any comment? We've just heard what you said, Councillor Hiscock, and I'm sure we need to make sure we've got the best return for the council. I would have thought that is the priority, but taking into consideration these other thoughts, Anybody else like to comment?
It's more than financial, Chairman. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Carolyn.
Chairman, sorry, it was just on that point. The council does have to be cognizant of the fact that it does have a legal duty to focus on the aspects that Rob identified around security of investment and liquidity of investment, with the return coming after that. But we do have legal duties that we have to take account of alongside being a responsible investor. So we do take that balance seriously, but as you've highlighted yourself, it is a balance that has to be struck between the two aspects.
Thank you.
Okay, would anybody else like a question or comment or an observation? Okay, I see no more hands. The recommendation is on page 47. It is just to note, but there are 3 recommendations. If you just want to have a quick glance at them, and if you're all content with them, and if there are no other comments, I would just like to ask that members would note the report. Okay, little nodding heads everywhere. Great. So thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
So if we move on to item 9, this is the whistleblowing policy, which is on pages 73 to 82. I think this is something that Councillor House asked to be brought back. Carolyn, would you like to talk to this, please?
Yes, just very briefly. We brought the policy to the December meeting, and Councillor House quite appropriately asked for further detail to be highlighted around the manner in which an elected member would deal with a whistleblowing policy raised by an individual, and also whether we could cover this in training. So we will include this in the governance briefings that will follow after the elections. And you can see on page 81, we have revised the policy to make it clear that if an elected member of Hampshire County Council is approached by an individual regarding the whistleblowing policy, then the elected member should contact the monitoring officer in the first instance, who will provide advice and support to determine the appropriate way forward. So, Councillor House, thank you very much for raising that. It was an unintended consequence of us not being clear enough within the policy, and it's good to get that cleared up now. Thank you.
Councillor House, you wanted to comment?
Yes, thanks very much, and thank you to Carolyn and staff for sorting this little gap out, because as was said, it's just something that hadn't been thought through in terms of the potential implications, and that's all perfectly reasonable. And I just wanted to apologise to staff that have been chasing me for details of the whistleblower and to follow up, because I'm in correspondence with the whistleblower, and we haven't yet resolved quite how the whistleblower wants to really move this forward. So therefore, just apologies to Carolyn, apologies to Barbara Beardwell. I don't think she's in the room. Because I haven't replied to them yet, and will do eventually, I imagine, depending upon other factors. But thank
you very much. Not at all. We're just keen to make sure that we provide you with the support you need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else like a comment? Excuse me. No other hands. So again, the recommendation is on page 73, and it's for members to note unless there are any last-minute questions. So thank you very much for that, Carolyn. Okay, so we'll now move on to item 10, which is on pages 83 to 94 of your pack. And these are non-exempt minutes of the Hampshire Pension Fund panel and the board of the 4th of December. I'm not quite sure what you normally do with these. Do I normally ask the committee member to present them, or should we just note the minutes as attached?
Thank you, Chairman. Usually just presented for noting unless there are any questions that colleagues wish to pose.
Okay, there's no little hands going up, so we'll note that item. Thank you very much. Now, item 11, I have to read out a little notice. This is the exclusion of the press and public. So members are asked to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business, as it is likely in the view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings that if members of the public were present during this item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information within paragraphs 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and further that in all the circumstances of the cases, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information for the reasons set out in the exempt minutes. So can I ask any members to speak to any concerns they have over that? And if not, I'll ask members to verbally agree to exclude the press and public. Little nods everywhere.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I could just ask for the webcast now to be ended.